What you did is you just created a campaign ad for every Democrat.
Republicans seem hell-bent on litigating what was the number one issue of 2020. What's the strategy here?
Every day that we lose spending in that battlefield, we get further and further behind.
When it comes to retribution, I can't wait for you to find what I left under your seat. It's Political Rehab, where PTI meets The Daily Show. This week, Republicans go all out to win the number one issue. From 6 years ago, Blanche gets crushed by Blanche. Trump's lawyers accidentally admit something awful. Ukraine's new top ally is a MAGA nutjob, and the Iran war reaches a true tipping point. Plus, our weekly look at the midterm battlefield has a clear, hands-down winner for one side. So let's get to this week's rundown. Anthony Fauci sat in front of the Senate Homeland Security Committee for 3 hours yesterday, and aside from an opening statement accusing Chairman Rand Paul of an unhinged obsession with slandering his reputation, he answered every single question by taking the Fifth Amendment. Republican senators used his silence to go after him personally. Josh Hawley called him a narcissist and a megalomaniac and a liar. Rick Scott called him a villain, and Senator Bernie Moreno's team clipped his own shouted, "Who the F do you think you are?" and posted it to social media in real time during the hearing. Spontaneous. Matt, Republicans seem hell-bent on litigating what was the number one issue of 2020, the way Trump is hell-bent on litigating the 2020 election all over again. It's hard for me to see how this helps them strategically. What's the strategy here?
Yeah, so America, you're welcome. You're going to get nonstop COVID and stolen election for the next 3 months. That's worked out well for us so many times. There is no benefit to relitigating COVID. As a strategist, I'm going to tell my candidates absolutely call for Fauci to be thrown in jail, because that is a message that works for our base. But the reason for that is very simple. Donald Trump was in charge, and the buck can't stop with him. There has to be some other villain. That's why we make it about Fauci, because we can't possibly say in an election that it was Donald Trump who made these decisions. This whole thing was performative. This was playing to the base. Like you said, they put it up on socials immediately. Let's not forget when they attacked Fauci for pleading the fifth so many times. Donald Trump pleaded the fifth 450 times during his deposition. That is not to say we should not be investigating. But the problem here, that's not what this was all about. It was a performance for the camera, and that's all we accomplished, and it's not going to help us in November.
There is a serious, legitimate conversation to be had about the origins of COVID if there was something productive to come out of this. The bottom line on what just happened this week is this may be the single biggest sign of Republican weakness that I've seen in the last 6 months. You have unified control of government, plus the ability for the Senate to hold hearings on anything it wants to. What's next? Are we going to do Hillary's emails? Benghazi, Whitewater? They'd be better off going after Hunter Biden's art at this point. That means you just have nothing new to talk about, no new ways to distract the voters. It's a sign of glaring weakness.
Last week, we talked about whether or not Blanche's nomination for Attorney General was in trouble, and this week it took another turn. Republicans postponed a critical vote on Todd Blanche's nomination, and it now looks like this may not even happen before August recess. The holdup seems to be that the Department of Justice does not want to put in writing that the $1.8 billion weaponization fund is dead. There's 2 Republicans that are probably not going to vote for him out of committee. To me, this really shows the White House complete disregard for accountability and transparency. Matt, how big of a deal is this?
It's not a big deal as far as the public is concerned. It's an epic self-own by the Trump administration and by Blanche himself. This is like the parable of the scorpion and the frog, the scorpion who stings the frog as they're in the stream, and they both sink under the waters to their death. And the scorpion says, "I can't help it. It's in my nature." All that these 2 Republicans senators are asking for, Tillis and Cornyn, is give us a fig leaf here, Todd. Give us something that we can stand on when we give our inevitable yes vote to you. Never mind what I outlined last week, that Todd Blanche should never set foot in the Department of Justice again. He has undergone an illegal, immoral, and reprehensible political vendetta campaign on behalf of his client, Donald Trump. He has no business being Attorney General of the United States of America. So despite all of that, these Republican senators are just looking for an excuse. Say yes to this guy. He can't even give them that. And on the eve of his confirmation vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the DOJ handed out a settlement to a right-wing MAGA activist who claimed he'd been wronged. He did the exact same thing that Cornyn and Tillis were saying, please don't do this, it's wrong. And he can't help himself. He's the scorpion, and he deserves to sink beneath the waves.
Look, I think he probably does ultimately get confirmed. But what we're seeing is Republican senators starting to do their job. But it's also the strongest, best argument for term limits. Because right now, these two senators, Tillis and Cornyn, are the ones that are holding this up. And everybody wants to talk about this as a revolt. But the reality is they don't have an election. And you can see what senators could actually do if they're not in there for life.
I agree with you that these Republican senators are truly revolting. Speaking of, we've got to talk about the blue state payback story that emerged in a court filing in a shocking moment of saying the quiet part out loud. A government lawyer admitted that 283 out of 284 Energy Department research grants that it canceled were for labs in states that voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, writing plainly that the funds were canceled solely because of that fact. That admission came at the exact same moment that Politico found that Donald Trump had approved disaster aid requests from Republican states at nearly 4 times the rate of Democratic states, including this month's denial of $227 million in storm aid to Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. Matt, take us inside Republican headquarters on this one. How do Republicans really feel about this?
Look, I'm all for retribution in politics. That's the game. But after you're elected, you serve the people, everyone. As president, there is no blue state, no red state. It's just America. When you target these states, you're also hurting Republicans. Those cuts reached 138 congressional districts, including 28 represented by Republicans. So because these states voted for Harris, or they had 2 Democrat senators, the Trump administration decided that it was going to not give aid, and it is directly hurting Republicans who are in office, Republicans that he needs their vote. It's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt America. It's a dangerous precedent we're setting that's going to come back and bite us in the ass.
Holding aside how a Rhode Island Republican should feel about this, or the fact that more Californians cast a vote for Donald Trump in 2024 than the combined total of voters in Alabama, Indiana, Kansas, and Tennessee, a point that The Atlantic raised this week. This is so deeply un-American. It's so deeply insidious. And it's something that those of us who opposed Donald Trump warned about in 2024. It wasn't just his whole Schedule F maneuver to try and give a MAGA loyalty test before allowing anyone to work for the federal government. You can't have a job unless you swear a loyalty oath to me. That doesn't sound like a fascist dictatorship. It's the fact that they were literally threatening to withhold Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, the kinds of things that Americans have earned from their government as American citizens, unless people voted for and supported the ruling regime. That is some authoritarian shit. And holding aside the issue of political revenge and things will come around and Democrats will be in control, they might do this to Republicans. Holding that aside for just a second, and the unfairness of what's happening to Republicans in these states, there is this fundamental undermining of what this country is all about. It's absolutely awful. And when it comes to retribution, I can't wait for you to find what I left under your seat.
I'm going to switch gears. Let's talk some foreign policy. And this is a story that you brought to my attention because honestly, I don't follow Laura Loomer all that often. But Laura Loomer, the crazy conspiracist MAGA influencer, traveled to Ukraine, met with Zelensky, experienced an air raid, and toured sites affected by the Ukraine war. She said Russia propaganda had shaped her earlier understanding of Ukraine and emerged advocating stronger for Kiev and greater pressure on Moscow. Now, this matters because Loomer is tight with Trump. She seems to call him all the time. She spent years minimizing the war. And now all of a sudden there's sanctions and Trump seems to be much more engaged. Matt, did Laura Loomer just become Ukraine's secret weapon?
I don't know what's happening here, Matt. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I think what probably happened is it's like that scene in A Clockwork Orange where Alex has his eyes pinioned open and he's exposed to awful, violent imagery. And he's like, oh, I've changed my ways. I've seen the light. This is a person who previously called Ukraine full of Nazi apologists. And then she came back from this trip to visit Vladimir Zelensky and said, I admit it, I fell for Russian propaganda. What? What is happening here? You could just say she's a crazy person, or you could say she's a massive political opportunist. She sees a vacuum left where Lindsey Graham used to be, and she's saying, you know what? I can occupy this space. This is a way to elevate myself in MAGA world. That's my best theory. What's yours? Republican politics better than I do.
I think she's just trying to be relevant, and her little shtick really hasn't been working lately. A lot of people are just brushing her off. So I think she saw this as a political opportunity. I think she went over there with the sole purpose that she could have greater influence. There's a lot of people in MAGA world that want to keep her a million miles away from Trump, because she is that crazy and the things she says is that toxic. And I think this is just another way to ingratiate herself back into the movement.
From the ridiculous to the deeply serious. We're going to talk about the Iran war here, but we've got to warn all our viewers that this is such a rapidly evolving story that the situation could change. As of now, at the end of this week, it is sure looking like we're entering a new, most dangerous, most tipping point phase of this war with Iran. In recent days, a drone attack hit 2 ships, including a U.S.-owned gas tanker. Saudi Arabia acknowledged for the first time that it had carried out joint strikes with the U.S. CENTCOM says it hit Iranian military command centers and missile and drone facilities yesterday. And so we seem to be hitting this point where the war is rapidly escalating after a brief kind of semi-ceasefire pause. This story emerged this week that the Department of Defense has been trying to retcon the history of service members who have been killed in action, trying to officially reduce the number from 18 down to 14, and also obscuring the number of American service members who have been wounded in the course of this action. This is a deeply troubling moment we seem to be hitting. I don't really have a question for you other than to say, how do you see it? Are we at a different phase?
There's a story out that said Trump is starting to get more and more angry that there hasn't been a resolution to this thing. I don't think anyone could see that when you hire a Fox News analyst to run the War Department, that maybe there would be problems along the way. I think the biggest change now is more countries are getting involved. We are starting to see Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Russia is helping Iran. This almost starts to feel like we're entering much more of a global kind of World War III kind of scenario, the worst case scenario. It feels right now that the only reason we had a pause was so that Trump could pause the war powers resolution and contend that this is a different war and the 60-day clock starts. We are hiding American soldiers' injuries and deaths, and we're not disclosing them till later. We're watching this thing escalate in a point that is getting out of hand to a point of zero control. This is a huge issue when it comes to the election, but it becomes a problematic issue for Americans going forward, our credibility in the world, and the everlasting impact this could have in the Middle East.
We focus on the political aspects of these news stories week because that's what this show is about. This is transcending the politics story. We knew that Russia was helping Iran, targeting information to go after our troops. Trump hasn't said a peep about that other than to excuse it and explain it away. We really are at a point where lots of powers are getting involved in this. It is extremely dangerous. But look, we are a politics show, and we do have to talk about the politics of the moment. And things are indeed escalating quickly on the political front as well. We are now under 100 days until the midterm elections. So let's look at this week's edition of The Battlefield.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is The Battlefield.
As always, let's do 3 for you, 3 for me. Give me your number one.
The first thing that stood out to me this week, 2 major spending stories, one on the Democrat, one on the Republican. On the Democrats, the Senate Majority PAC had a July 23rd spending announcement where they're going to reserve an additional $54 million in television advertising across 4 Republican-held Senate seats: Ohio, Iowa, North Carolina, and Alaska. Now, that's important because it shows that they are thinking about trying to spend money in seats that, if you would ask me 6 months ago, I'd say those are Republican seats, but they're not. They're in play, and that is a potential issue for Republicans.
If you're watching this on YouTube or you're on either of our Substacks, you can find my live stream from just a couple of days ago with the spokesperson for Senate Majority PAC, Lauren French, who walked us through their strategy and what they're seeing in all of those races that you just laid out. Talk to me about this from your perspective as a Republican campaign operative. When you see the other side playing on your turf, what does that tell you about how they view the battlefield?
It says to me that they see these in play. When you look at the Republican side of the spending ledger, the Senate top GOP super PAC said they're launching a $17 million summer ad campaign in North Carolina. The only reason you're spending money in North Carolina in the summer is because this race is getting out of hand, and you're going to try to pull that back. The one big glaring thing that happened is Republicans in Texas are refusing to spend any money. Both the Senate Leadership Fund, which is the Republicans, and MAGA Inc. have not reserved any ad dollars in Texas right now.
Wow.
Now, that's a big issue because we estimate it takes about $15 million a week in super PAC advertising to mount a comprehensive paid media campaign. And right now there is zero. There's something like 18 plus television markets, and we're looking to see who's going to blink first. The Senate Leadership Fund doesn't really have an interest. The Republicans doesn't seem to really have an interest. They backed Cornyn. They're looking at MAGA Inc. and saying, you created this mess, you fix this mess. But every day that we lose spending in that battlefield, because right now the Democrats ahead by all public polling, is we get further and further behind. That doesn't mean we can't win, but it means we may have to spend a hell of a lot more there, which means when we go back to the Democrat targets, like in Iowa or Ohio, there may not be money left to spend. This is a big deal right now for Republicans. We are defending a lot, and we don't have the resources in states we need to hold.
That's a really fascinating insight into how Republicans are deploying their resources and this emerging Texas standoff. Give me your number two.
So there's a report in Axios that Elon Musk is going to start jumping into the midterms. He's going to revamp his dormant America PAC, and he's going to start spending a lot of money to try to help out Republicans. They're going to focus on door knocking, advertising, and direct mail towards a conservative base, towards low propensity voters. Now, this is something that can really be a game changer. And for those of you who may not remember, part of the reason why Trump was able to win this last time is we targeted those voters that do not vote in every election and push them out to the polls. And the fact that Elon Musk is starting to jump in and going to spend money is an interesting fact because it could help in some of those tight races and improve the margins.
I will just say that he did spend the money in 2020. How much did you guys rely on that Elon Musk spending in 2024?
Well, quite a bit, honestly. We had to because our ground game is shit across the country. There are some states that actually are really good, but In a lot of these places, we don't have that infrastructure anymore. And the thing is, and how we look at it as strategists, is when we map out our voter totals, we look at voters that are going to vote and we try to persuade them. But there's this whole group of voters that do not show up every election, and they take a lot of work to get there. And a lot of times these can be Republican voters that we just have to push them out, and that's how we can improve our margins. Now, the interesting thing about this is mail-in ballots is the key tactic we use for low propensity voters. What we have to do is make it as easy as possible for them to vote, and mail in absentee ballots is the easiest way. Have it delivered, have them fill it out, get it back. And so this attack on mail-in ballots may actually be a counter.
We have polling showing that low information voters and low propensity voters have also shifted radically toward Democrats over the last 2 years. That is a big deal, and it makes the task for Elon Musk or anyone else who's going to try to mobilize these kinds of voters that much harder. All right, let's quickly hit your third.
Third one is Trump becoming a liability, and how much will he force himself into a lot of these campaigns? And this is the example I'll use. Trump announced this week he's going to end subsidies for Medicare drug premiums. Now, as a Republican, as a conservative, I think it's probably the right thing to do, but it should have been done in 2025, not announced 3 months before the election, because what you did is you just created a campaign ad for every Democrat to run that's going to target seniors who, by the way, vote the highest margins of any group out there. Trump just gave Democrats a campaign ad to say, we're going to make your drug prices more expensive. The other side of this is how many times is he going to show up? He showed up in Michigan, for example, this week or last week, and started campaigning and claiming the economy is in great shape. It feels completely detached from reality, especially right now when Trump's approval numbers at 34%, 73% say he's focused on the wrong problems, and 78% of Republicans only approve of him. Now, that sounds like a lot, but in order to win elections, you need about 92% of the Republicans to vote for you. That's a significant margin, and that's why we're seeing Republican enthusiasm only about 19%.
First of all, regardless of what happens in the Michigan primary this upcoming week, I thoroughly invite Donald Trump to make a return trip to Michigan. Best thing that could possibly happen to Democrats there. Americans for Prosperity Action, the Koch-linked super PAC, found that in Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Montana, New Hampshire, and Michigan, does those sound like potentially significant states to you, Matt?
Yep.
A fifth of Republicans are telling them they're either going to stay home or they're going to vote for Democrats. 1/5. So that's the kind of reaction you're getting from base Republican voters in these kinds of places. And I'm sure that Donald Trump inserting himself even more is not going to be helpful.
Not even a little bit right now, because in these swing states, he's toxic. How does this match up on the Midterm HQ report?
Over on Midterm HQ, and we can take a look at the scoreboard here, it has been a theme week, and I think you'll see what I mean. So looking at our structural indicators, I want you to cast your attention to the blue arrows. That's what indicates that things have moved in the Democrats' direction, or generally benefiting Democrats. Let's look at Donald Trump's net approval rating, his net approval rating among independents, the generic ballot as measured by two different sets of polling averages, consumer sentiment, and gas prices. I am seeing a 6 for 6, baby. I am seeing nothing but upward facing blue arrows for Democrats. I want to hold on this number that caught my eye. We can talk about it in a minute, put it in the parking lot. But there's another piece of evidence that came in over the last week, which is some ratings changes from Larry Sabato at the UVA Crystal Ball Center, and they moved 5 House races from leaning Republican to toss-up category. So that's in Democrats' direction, another upward blue arrow. And John Ossoff in his Senate race also getting moved from lean Democrat to likely Democrat, a much more secure position. I will say that lines up with the only movement we saw in Senate race polling averages this week, where Ossoff actually improved his position by 2.1 percentage points to a Democratic leaning margin of 7.6 points. And so what you're seeing really across the board here is a variety of ratings and structural indicators all going in the same direction, all trending blue.
How does this match up on the map? How does this look compared to previous cycles? And what are you seeing there?
It was a really interesting week when it comes to the map. There were independent findings from two of the major race rating outlets this week, Charlie Cook and Larry Sabato, looking at the House map. And they both found that the map has shifted by about 2 points more Republican since 2024. That sounds like advantage Republicans. But hold on, because there was some additional analysis out of that Larry Sabato shop showing that actually, and this goes back to that number that I put in the parking lot just a moment ago, actually, if you compare the map to 2018, what you find is that there were 233 districts that were reasonable targets for Democrats where they had a substantial chance of winning. 233 seats back in 2018. Here in 2026, it's 234. So even while the overall map has indeed redshifted, the number of targets available to Democrats, plausible pathways to them gaining the majority, has actually also improved. It just underscores the fact that there is a clear lane pathway for Democrats to retake the House, despite all of the gerrymandering-induced movement toward Republicans.
All right, so you've looked at all of this. You've sifted through all the numbers, so not everybody has to. What's your takeaway this week? What's your bottom line?
My bottom line this week is that it's awfully hard to call this anything other than a hands-down win week for Democrats when you've got all the structural indicators and race ratings all going in the D direction. I will say, though, that the bigger thing for me this week was what didn't happen. And it's something that I lay out in more detail on Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, my Substack, and this week's Midterm HQ. It's what I call the burning lottery ticket principle. Look, Matt, you and I have both managed and consulted on campaigns. What you're really looking for is opportunities. How are you going to move things? Every single day that goes by, if you're behind, where you fail to make up ground, where you fail to take advantage of your opportunities, is like a lottery ticket that you could have used to win that day that you didn't. And hence, it's like lighting a useless lottery ticket on fire. That's what the last week has felt like to me. Republicans, they're missing the boat on them. And so that's 7 lottery tickets that are on fire over the past week. The biggest reason that this was a win week for Democrats is not because of what happened. It's because of what didn't happen. How do you see it?
Exactly right. That's why Texas is such a big deal. The fact that there's no ad spending in Texas is a real problem. Republicans have not done what we need to do right now. We are behind the 8 ball. We are setting ourselves up for an epic loss. My only ray of hope this week was Elon Musk. And wow, I just don't want to have to depend on Elon Musk bailing us out, because that is hard to manage.
You're right. This was a week with a lot of downbeat stories, and I could use more rays of hope.
We spend a lot of time talking about technology like it's either going to save the world or destroy it. And most of the time, it's doing something much simpler. It's solving a problem. There's a swimmer that was caught in a rip current off a New Jersey coast, and a sheriff's drone flew over the water, dropped an inflatable life preserver directly to them, buying the rescuers time they needed to reach that person. On Hilton Head, there's small robots that are traveling sidewalks, pathways, measuring slopes, pavement conditions, and accessibility barriers so the town can identify places that need improvement. And then there's this story I saw this week about the United States Navy. The Navy is testing 3D printers aboard ships so sailors can manufacture replacement parts while they're still at sea. Think about that. A massive Navy ship operating in the middle of the Pacific is no longer entirely dependent on somebody finding a spare part in a warehouse thousands of miles away. Now, these are 3 completely different problems. But in every single case, somebody looked at technology available and asked a better question. What else can this do? Now, that may be the best kind of innovation. See the problem, rethink the tool, build a better solution. That's pure American ingenuity, and that is what makes America great.
I really believe, like Martin Luther King Jr. said, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That's why I try hard in my life not to go out of my way to seek revenge or retribution against people who have done me a bad turn, which is just like our current president. Oh, gosh. Because I truly believe, as the philosopher Jojo Siwa said, karma's a bitch. And we saw that in display in 3 ways this week. Story number 1, Elise Stefanik's flameout. Former Congresswoman Elise Stefanik spent years pivoting from being a moderate to building her brand as Trump's most aggressive defender. As Andy Borowitz pointed out on Substack yesterday, she appointed herself the Donald's #1 attack dog during his first impeachment. She became a full-fledged election denier, signing an amicus brief urging the Supreme Court to invalidate the results in 4 battleground states. And in 2024, she expressed her concern about the treatment of the January 6th hostages during an appearance on Meet the Press, thus equating the QAnon shaman with Nelson Mandela. That got her elevated to House Republican Conference chairwoman, and then got her nominated as UN ambassador. And then, as the life cycle of anyone in Trump's orbit always dictates, she got knifed by Donald Trump. Her nomination got yanked because there was not sufficient Republican margin in the House to sustain losing her seat. Then she announced that she was going to run for governor. Then Trump decided not to endorse her. Then she decided not to run for governor, nor to run for her House seat. And now she doesn't have a job. And so she placed a thirsty, desperate op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this past week, begging for a job from Elon Musk, which is badly timed because of story number 2. Musk's businesses took a massive hit in the past week because, like he's done his whole career, Elon Musk made a bunch of claims that didn't hold up, and investors finally stopped buying it. Tesla's second quarter earnings posted a $4.75 billion net loss, missed earnings per share estimates. SpaceX, which went public earlier this year, has fallen roughly $1 trillion from its post-IPO peak. Again, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Couldn't have happened at a better time, right as Elise Stefanik was trying to post her resume with him. And that brings me to story number 3. Marjorie Taylor Greene got married this past week. Married to the love of her life. Right-wing reporter, correspondent, something, Brian Glenn. And look, I think this fits my arc of the moral universe thesis as well, because her break with Donald Trump was not small. She was one of his most loyal defenders, but this past year, she became one of only 4 House Republicans to try to force the House to vote to release the Epstein files. And eventually, when she couldn't take all of the insanity from Trump himself, she just resigned her House seat. I find this particularly hopeful because she tried to change course and find a new pathway forward in her life. And you know what? I'm not going to begrudge her that or an ounce of happiness in getting married to someone she truly loves. And I think that should give us all hope that we can evolve, change, and find happiness ahead. All of us except Matt Wylie when he discovers what left under his seat. And on that, Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.